Hi everyone, it's Hans here, the founder of Cappuccino, and welcome to this latest episode of Flat Whites and Insights, a podcast created to allow a space for open, honest and vulnerable conversations with real people, all over a beautiful cup of coffee. We're here in my home, so I'll be providing the flat whites, and my guests, they'll be providing the insights. So grab a coffee for yourselves, take a moment, and I hope you enjoy this latest conversation. Thank you, take care, and enjoy. Cassie, hi.
Hello.
Thanks so much for coming over to come on Flat Whites and Insights and tying it into your trip back to Oxford.
I'm really just here for this, to be honest. Like
That's
everything
what
else,
we'll say, yeah.
everything else was just planned afterwards. Like I just flew over for this.
No, but yeah, flew over from Ireland.
Yeah, from Derry. Yeah.
From Derry, yeah, which I know is your hometown. We were kind of talking before going on air. And yeah, it's amazing to have this chance to actually catch up and have a proper conversation. I mean, we've known each other through social media for quite a while, and probably only seen you once or twice at my sister's,
in real life.
Annabelle's like kind of party. But yeah, you've been quite a big part, probably more than you realise, of the cappuccino journey, and it has given me the confidence to really make it go and make it become a thing. We'll dive into that a little bit later, but for people who don't know who you are, let's give a brief introduction.
A brief introduction,
Yeah,
yes.
just a brief introduction.
Without my life story. Hello. I've never been recorded on a podcast before. It's gonna be interesting. So I'm Cassie. I moved to Oxford when I was 18 to go to Oxford Brookes. I studied there for technically 4 years, but I did 2 of those years in Australia. But Oxford was very much part of my life, and I loved it, and I decided to stay for a little bit longer. So I was in Oxford for 7 years in total, and just before I was leaving, a micro Oxford influencer was doing influencing, but not in
two influencers together.
I know, not in the kind of skinny detox tea way, but I very much wanted to showcase the diversity and the talent that Oxford had. So I really wanted to look at local entrepreneurs, people of influence, local businesses who were doing good for the community and were impressive and, you know, going outside of their lanes, which was why it was such an obvious choice to feature you on the blog and everything that you were doing with Cappuccino. But mixing it up with some lifestyle bits and pieces and, also where the latest restaurants that people should be going to and local activities. I did some work with a council. It was really cool. It was really great. But sadly had to come to an end. I ended up leaving Oxford quite abruptly about 2.5 years ago, and I moved to my hometown in Ireland, in Derry. So I was born in Ireland. I don't sound Irish at all, but I was born there. All my family are from there. It's funny, when I tell people I'm Irish over here, everyone finds it quite endearing. When I tell people I'm Irish at home, they just laugh at me. So the last 2.5 years, I've been back in Derry, and I didn't really know when I initially went how long I was going to go over for. But I've ended up staying. I completely fell back in love with my roots and being close to my family and meeting some incredible people there as well. And so, you know, a couple of days turned into a month, which turned into 6 months, which has turned into 2.5 years. And a big part of that was refocusing on myself and looking after my mental health and wellness.
Yeah, amazing. No, thank you for that. No, really, really good, and so much kind of covered in there already.
That was a brief introduction.
That was the brief introduction. Yeah.
You should wait to hear the long one.
This isn't actually an episode. This is going to be a series now. But no. So I think one of the first things, I guess, is about how I became familiar with yourself, and it was through as you said, the kind of made in Oxford influencer kind of area that you were in, and I think you mentioned yourself, but it wasn't your everyday influencer. You wanted to make sure it was something with meaning, something where you're highlighting and showcasing people that are doing good.
Yeah.
and making a difference and just shouting about the Oxford community. For me, when I was quite new on Instagram, I think that's something that drew me in. And then, when the offer came out to obviously have the article, I think it was during COVID, or maybe just before, I'm not sure.
I think it was during Made in Oxford. I started just before COVID, and then it kind of, obviously when no one had anything better to do with their time than read my articles, it like boomed within COVID, which was incredible. And I would say even today, most of my Oxford friends who I'm still really close to, I met through Made in Oxford, like yourself, like Samantha Harmon. She's now a personal stylist. She was the editor of Oxford Mail and Oxford Living, and I thought she was just incredible, being woman, female editor so high up, which was just unheard of in her industry. And I interviewed her, and now I've made her my best friend. And through you, I met obviously Annabelle Buckers, the podcast producer, and she contacted me after looking at your article saying, would you think about doing a podcast? But then when we actually met up for coffee, we didn't talk about podcasting at all. And now they're best friends as well, which is great. So it was really creating a little bit of a community when we really all needed it. And, businesses were really struggling at that time. At the time I had local businesses too. And so it was just, a creative outlet for me, but also a way to really create a community in a time that was just so lonely for everyone.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that's it, isn't it? It's about connecting people.
Yeah.
Whatever industry you're in, I know it's cliche, it's the people industry really.
Yeah.
It's something that we talk about a lot at work, although it's through football, but football's just the vehicle, and it's a very powerful vehicle. It's such a popular sport, biggest in the world, and so you can really make change and implement change.
Yeah.
And you draw people in with the football, and then you keep them because of the connection, and you keep them because of the friends they make, and the benefits of physical exercise for mental health, etc. as well. So I think, and that's what I found through Cappuccino as well. People that initially I just started as friends online, or however you call it, have made some really good real friends from it, and have some really strong connections, and particularly from that, the coffee space, the coffee community, which kind of took me in when I maybe felt like I needed somewhere to be and something to feel a part of when I was at my lowest, after my kind of burnout. And it's amazing how I think there's less and less now, because social media is here to stay, and it is such a big force. I mean,
it is.
At that time, it was something you were doing alongside work. That's now day job.
That's now my full-time role. So with Made in Oxford and the growth that it suddenly got, I had a background in communications, but internal communications, so you're talking inside the company to employees, but there was a lot of transferable skills that I was enabled to take to really fine-tune my own social media presence, the blog, and learning everything that I needed to promote that. And as I said, with my ex-husband, we had businesses in Oxford as well, and I was able to apply those skills to those businesses, and our audiences skyrocketed as well when they were pubs that weren't even open yet. Our online audience was going through the roof. And so it was from that I started helping other businesses with social media strategies and getting connected to your online audience at that time when all the shutters were down. And that then became a business, which is now a digital marketing consultancy that's been going on 3 years now. So that's the full-time role. And I think, we were mentioning before, social media is obviously where I started. It's my first love, and it is an incredible, powerful force, but it is also exhausting.
We were just saying, weren't we, in the journey, because I did have to pick you up in the car because someone got on the wrong bus. But we'll leave it at that. Ended up in the countryside. It must have felt like Derry.
I just wanted to get back to my country route.
Yeah, that was it. The urban nature of Didcot was a bit much. So, but yes. Anyway, we were chatting in the car. It was actually good because it gave us a chance to actually kind of,
That's what I mean. That was my plan all along.
Yeah, chat a little bit with each other before going onto the podcast, and something you did mention, and it's something I can relate to because I do a little bit of social media for work as well. nothing like the extent that you probably are talking about. I've only got one work account that I manage. But if you're on your phone and you're looking and you just want to scroll, like you mentioned, it's keeping that boundary in place, and because I can imagine it can be quite easy for social media to always feel like work now, even if you're trying to go on for personal reasons.
Definitely. And I think obviously there's kind of 2 points to this. With it being my day job, like I look after 8 accounts, all from my personal phone, which is mental because obviously in the evenings I want to connect with my loved ones. I want to, you know, my phone constantly needs to be on because if my mommy like calls me and I don't answer, obviously like a terrible accident's happened. But also, you know, wanting to connect with my friends and stuff on WhatsApp. But then I'm getting bombarded by client notifications, and even if I turn notifications off, I can't deal with the red dot.
Like, I'm the same. Like, I have to have zero notifications.
It needs to be cleared. And even going into these apps, and obviously that's how they're designed, to clear notifications. You know, I'll get drawn on, especially in a work day, which I probably shouldn't be saying in case any clients are listening to this, but, you know, I'll go in to do something for my client and then I'll just pop into my personal account to see what's going on and then go through a whole there. But the other side of this as well is because I left Oxford so abruptly and I had to close down the blog because, you know, I think at my peak, I was at just reaching about 7,000 followers. And which was, you know, and that was 90% Oxford, which was amazing for Oxford businesses and Oxford people because if they wanted to work with me, they had a solid, engaged Oxford audience there. But, you know, when I started, well, first of all, I definitely took some time off social media. I stopped posting about Oxford. I stopped doing articles. And I was posting the beautiful beaches and mountains of Donegal. No one cared. And I lost about 3,000 followers in like the space of 2 months. And like from, you know, not that I was ever doing this to be an influencer or anything like that. There was obviously a lot more value in it. But, you know, you do want to see your account do well. You do get used to certain metrics and certain successes and when you post something.
It's a sense of, it's human nature, it's gratification.
It is.
And that's why I was going to ask you, how did that make you feel?
Well, it was, obviously I understood from, you know, my social media strategy point of mind. I was like, well, now clearly my ideal audience does not align with the content that I'm putting out. And so I could logically make sense of it, but it was still like, oh, you guys then.
It's hard not to take it personally.
It was hard not to take it personally. And then like I did try and start a new blog at the beginning of this year. And that was a bit more generic. It was just cassiejane.co.uk. And I was doing articles every week. And in a similar vein, you know, I was doing a little bit more travel, but not generic to dairy. You know, I was doing lifestyle stuff. I was doing career stuff. But again, I think in hindsight, that wasn't so much because I wanted to do it. It was more because I was trying to reclaim
chasing
what had
gone. It was, and it's maybe becomes and I think people sit and say the pressure of when you got. I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, people in the public eye, and obviously there's a level. We're not saying that either of us are like, you know, celebrity, TV star, whatever. But there's a level of once you've got an account, and I feel that sometimes a pressure on Cappuccino. Like, I'm a lot better now, but when I first started, I posted 3 times a day.
Wow, yeah.
At that point, I was signed off work. It was my everything in a way, and it was for me more than anyone else. But at the same time, once you get that buzz of I've gained followers, because I remember saying to my sister, imagine if I got 100 followers. Like, there's a lot of nice cafes in Oxford, and I'd never been on Instagram before, and then within the space of probably 6 months, I had 1,000 followers. And it's kind of plateaued a little bit since then because you probably caught up that audience. But I very much was driven by the numbers. But that was part of why I burnt out in the first place, because I'd always been a achievement, trying to chase the gratification and validation. But there was a pressure then, as you say, to be chasing that. And I want to circle back to something that you mentioned when you said about going back to dairy, and you mentioned about it's been really good about spending more time on yourself and focusing on your mental health and things. So what does that look like in reality, and why do you feel that was needed in a sense? Because you said about 7,000 followers, I'm in Oxford, and
Yeah.
from the outside in, for me, I
Yeah.
was like, oh my god, Made in Oxford's featured me on an article. Like, Mum, I've made it. And now she's on my podcast here. So
yeah, when I left Oxford, for various reasons, my mental health was definitely at its rock bottom. It was off the back of COVID, which was a very tricky time for a lot of people, a lot of stress. Obviously, like, it's very much in public knowledge, like my marriage broke down as well. And so, it was quite funny actually. I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago even. And I always say about how when shit hit the fan, I ran home to Mally, who was in Derry. And then she ended up naming the podcast Running Home, which when I saw it in black and white, I was just like, oh, that's not what I meant. But really, it was in reality. Like I did want to come back to Mally, come back to my roots, come back to Derry, because with Derry's in Northern Ireland, it's right on the border, so it's still within the UK, which meant during COVID, it counted as a domestic flight. So whilst all international flights were grounded, I could still fly home to Derry in the little peak windows that we had when things were a bit more chill.
Yeah.
So, and obviously because it was COVID, we were just outside all the time. And so we were doing beach walks and we were in the mountains, and my mummy got a dog and it was all very cute. And I completely fell back in love with the country, with the quiet, with the peace, and the people. And so when I knew that I needed to go somewhere, like there was no question of where it was going to be. And I didn't know how long I was going to be there for. And yeah, but my mental health was at an absolute crisis. And it was really just, I would even say still that I've not really fully focused on my mental health until the last year or so, because I think in that time when I first got there, I didn't really have time to think about my mental health, because I was thinking about what the fuck am I going to do next? Because
almost function comes before
feeling.
Sometimes function comes before feeling. And
I went into survival mode of, right, where am I going to live? What am I going to do for money? What's my life going to look like? And it was, you get very few chances in life where you've got a complete blank slate and you can do anything.
Yeah.
Like I could have done anything, which was overwhelming. And so there came a lot of that. Obviously, from a practical point of view, it was, looking after the end of the marriage and getting my things. And, Derry was very much just a home base for me. But there was just, as time went on, I was loving being back with my roots. I was loving the countryside. Derry is, as I said, it's just on the border of Northern Ireland, but it's only about an hour and a half away from Belfast, which is like our big city. But it's also about an hour away from, it's right next to Donegal, but an hour away from this town called Dunfanaghy, which is where my parents had a caravan. And that summer that I left, I went straight down to that caravan and just lived in that caravan for about 6 months. And that's when I was reconnecting with nature and everything like that. And I felt incredible. I think there was like a huge surge of positivity because I had made a step to change my life. I was able to do things that I wasn't able to do before. And so there was almost like a rush of, of like almost just winning the lottery or something. I don't know.
Almost like a sense of sudden freedom.
Yeah, maybe. I was going to say like just as if I just got out of jail. I think I would get in trouble. If I've said it now, so I don't care.
No, but in terms of, and I think you mentioned about that, you don't often get a clean slate. And I think again, it's different, and whether that's coming out of a relationship, coming out of a job, coming out of just a character. We build these stories and characters of ourselves about what society wants us. And we were talking again before we hit record about for yourself, like as a woman, it's like, oh, you want, wedding, kids, find that kind of life. And I think it is changing, but definitely there is still these kind of pressures and what you need to do.
There definitely is.
And I think I guess I can flip it to myself, like being a guy, and it was, you've got to be, be strong, be the breadwinner, you've got to, look after your family, look after your partner and everything. And so for me, the story I created was that I was going to be a scientist and I was going to get a PhD and everything. And so although it was really difficult when I then had to quit that, almost when I had that time signed off, and then that had always been what I wanted to do. I was so tunnel vision, so I almost had that clean slate moment, and I was like, well, I can do anything now. Yeah. And I've ended up, and so I'm so grateful I had my breakdown at 22. And I say this a lot of times, 22 is my favourite number, because basically that's the age that I kind of like stopped existing and started living for me. That was when I was living for me, and now coffee, football, I get to share conversations like this and try and just encourage like vulnerability, because something that I was never shown before I was 22. I didn't have it, so it's such a new perspective, and similar but different in terms of maybe for yourself, where you were on a life path, a life journey. You thought this was what your life was going to be, and as you say, from the outside in, people are thinking, got it made.
Yeah, got it
Appreciate
made.
The
No, my life looked beautiful online. I looked like the happiest person in the world. And I actually caught up with a friend this week, and he said this with a lot of love, I'm hoping. But he was saying, Cassie, you've matured so much. You've come so far, and you just look so genuinely happy. Because you used to irritate the shit out of me. And I probably did to a lot of people. And I think that is the one side of, influencing and stuff. On the one hand, you have to be authentic. But then on the other hand, if you are authentic, all she does is moan on her Instagram. Like it's you can't ever really win. So I was, and at that time, for me and for the environment that I was in, the outside perspective was very important, and that having a good front and presenting myself as being this very happy person.
Because I think you were your brand.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that was
exactly like I was the maid in Oxford. So I think really I had that initial excitement and like rebirth and joy when I first got back to Ireland for that first couple of months. But then it really started to sink in, like, I can do anything, but what am I going to do? And there was a real time, and I would say it was a good year as well, of like really working hard to find what that was going to be. Like it got to the point I had an absolute crash, and like not so much mental, but it was probably mental, but I was putting it off. It was my body. I needed to be hospitalized and had emergency surgery. And then at that point, I was still doing the business, but mostly because I hadn't told anyone yet in Oxford that I'd actually left. So I still had Oxford clients at that point.
So it felt like you were almost keeping up that kind of external,
but mostly just to make sure that I still had the finances coming in. And so I then obviously people started to realise I wasn't in Oxford anymore, and the work started slowing down, and I had no network. I knew no one in Ireland, and so I was having to rebuild, and then trying to rebuild, but then my body was just like, nah.
Just needed to.
Nope. And so then I decided to take a pause from Maida Media, which is the name of my business, and so I got a job for a little while. Realized I don't like working for other people, but I had enough, paychecks to get my mortgage. And so I decided to get the keys to my mortgage and restart Maida Media in the same week, with 3 months emergency savings. So at that point I was in like desperate, like hard work, hustle, meet everyone, speak to everyone, be everywhere and do everything. And that was a good year of real hard work, never knowing when the next paycheck was coming in, not knowing how I was going to pay my mortgage next month. I had no financial support, and so it was really like, but I did it, and I'm proud that I did it. I'm proud that I got to that point because, you know, people always think, oh, starting a business is great. And, you know, like it is really hard. And then it's even harder to make it full time. Like I still say to people, and I'm meeting up with clients who are asking me not just for social media advice, but business advice from starting up. And I have to say to them, look, I was only financially viable 6 months ago. Like I only stopped worrying about when my next paycheck was coming in 6 months ago. And that took me a long time. So I think, again, at that time, there was no room to think about anything else than how I was making that next mortgage payment.
It was that function over feeling. It was like, I've got to do this. There's no other option.
So like there wasn't any room or time to hear the narrative. Well, you need to look after yourself before you look after anything else. Like that just wasn't there.
I guess because in your perspective or in that situation, well, how can I look after myself if I'm not
exactly
having money to
looking
pay the
after
bills
myself
is
and as well, like financial anxiety and financial stress is one of the most dangerous. And so, you know, I was like, well, I can't do anything for myself. I can't sit in a bubble bath until I know that my lights are going to still be on next month. And so the first thing I did in terms of looking at my mental health and looking at my well-being was secure what I needed to get my financial well-being sorted. Because, you know, single girl with a mortgage as self-employed, like that's, luckily I live in one of the cheapest cities in the UK. I came from the most expensive to one of the cheapest.
Situation in Oxford would be
Oxford absolutely not. But still, even in that, it was incredibly difficult. And so, but once I got that, like it took a month or two for my shoulders to detach from my ears. And then I was like, whew, okay, I know that my bills are going to be paid next month. What's next? What does the rest of my life look like?
Amazing. And even like relaying that back now, you must be like super proud of yourself.
Oh yeah.
Like hearing that, and you could be like,
I'm like I surviving 1 year self-employed with a mortgage was a big like, well done, I've done it. But now let's just chill out a little bit.
And almost that knowing like, okay, if I got through that, I can get through anything in terms of like what this business throws at me. I feel like I've got the foundations in place now to make it work. And that's incredible. And I think I kind of keep an eye on what you've been doing on socials and kind of clients. I saw you on a podcast recently about the greener fields. About that story, kind of saying about going back to Ireland and the story. And I think even just hearing that, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who will be listening who will know of Made in Oxford. Obviously, I've got quite, Cappuccino was Oxford based as well, so there's going to be a lot of crossover. But also they maybe will have just seen that outside perspective. And I think that's why it's so important. I think people like ourselves who are on social media and have a little bit of influence in that space, you know, the reality behind it is always. And
I do wish I could have been in a space where, you know, because I was very value driven and doing what I was doing with Made in Oxford to show that authenticity, but it just wasn't viable at that time. And so I have done since, like with my personal, like I restarted a personal page, and am I trying to grow it? Maybe I am. I'm not sure what for. I don't know if I'm still trying to catch up with what I had before. But also I just like content creation, and I just like making people happy, and I just like...
It's a chance to express yourself, right?
And
get your personality out there.
Yeah, show my personality. Like I am sharing more of like the lower days. Again, it's getting that balance right, I think. But you know, I definitely care less about what I'm putting up. And just, you know, it's, everyone needs to be doing it with social media. It's just like being really like looking after your corner of the internet, because the internet is a dark place, and it can, well, it's obviously an incredible place, but it can be a dark place, and social media especially can be a dark space. So we all need to be like the gatekeepers of our own corners, like looking at what we're posting and how are other people going to be feeling about what we're posting. Seeing what we comment on and what we're commenting to other people. and just like really being like taking responsibility and being accountable for our own actions, because if we all did that, like it would be in a much nicer place. Now obviously like there's just people that aren't wired that way, and you know, they've got their own issues, but it's definitely something that I'm thinking more about is, you know, what am I bringing across, and is this going to make anyone feel bad about themselves? And you can't really be responsible for everybody's feelings, but you know, it's just being a little bit more mindful about what's going out there.
Yeah, just being a bit conscious about it. Yeah, and I think it's so true, particularly in, say, certain, I know there was the kind of cost of living crisis and stuff like that. I think it did make me feel a little bit more, you know, if I'm out, you know, nice cafes all the time and this and that. And that would externally look like, oh, he's got all this money to burn. Whereas, you know, it was tight, it was difficult. But again, just being aware, isn't it? That not necessarily that you have to...
Don't audit yourself,
Because I think for some people, the idea of having an account on this podcast or posting about things online would make them more anxious. Everyone deals with it differently. For me, it's a way for me to do it. It's almost like a digital journal for me, Cappuccino. If I'm feeling something, I just put it out there or have a little bit of conversation. I don't really... I've had a few guests on who say about journaling and how it's really helped them and everything. You know, I struggle with it. One of my previous guests, Jazz, she's like Witch Bitch Barista as her account, and she's like created her own gratitude journal. And she did send me one, which is amazing. So I am trying to stick with that, but it's just a few like bullet points and questions. I can't do the full thing.
So and we'll talk about more in terms of the practical ways of how I've been coping, but gratitude has been a huge thing for me. Basically, when I decided, okay, like I need to think about myself a little bit now. I went through therapy for a couple of months, which was game changing. It was good just to be able to just drop everything and not worry about who I'm hurting or what I'm saying 100%. Or anything.
Speak with no consequence.
It was incredible. And we did work out through quite a lot, because one of the things as well that I do want to make clear is whilst obviously the last couple of years and you know my departure from Oxford and everything was all very traumatic, as was the time before that. Like my relationship with trauma has been a lot longer than that, and I've dealt with probably in reality much bigger things than like the ending of my marriage, and so it's my journey with mental health especially, but more really with trauma has been a lot longer. And so
is that something that you are only realising now since the therapy, or is that something that you maybe were always aware of but just didn't want to?
No, I think I've always known that I've gone through a lot. And people who know me well will say like, I have gone through a lot from a really like too young an age as well. But I don't think I understood the long-term effects it would have on me. So like there's certain periods of my life and certain events that I can compartmentalize quite well, and I've always seen them as something that's quite separate from each other, because there's been just a few bombs just dropped sprinkled over the course of years. And it was only when I was in therapy and she spoke to me and she was like, so like, tell me about your life. And I was just like, and I started like, I think the first session was just getting her up to speed on things from when I was a young teenager to upwards. And it took the whole time and just being able to tell her stuff. And long story short, I think what we ended up realizing is that obviously trauma is, you know, you can process it in your way at the time. For me, it was just battling through and then shipping the box away. And I think what was really enlightening with her is because I at the time as well was really struggling with my motivation and a few behaviours, and at this time consequently a lot of my friends were getting diagnosed with ADHD. And there was this kind of wave of incredible and enlightening conversations happening about how adult women do tend to get very late ADHD diagnoses. And there were so many symptoms of ADHD that I related to instantly. And a lot of the risk factors that I was relating to, and a lot of behaviours that I was exhibiting. But I was talking to my therapist, and she was like, but you don't have ADHD. And I was like, why don't I have ADHD? Like, just tell me I do so that I know and that I can feel better about myself.
Yeah. It's almost looking for a reason.
Looking for a reason. And it was just because obviously ADHD does, it comes from childhood, and there was a lot of the criteria that I was missing. Like things like being unorganized or being late, which are, stereotypically quite core ADHD qualities. Like, other than being late today, I am never late.
Just for me. Thank you.
I'm like, if I'm not 10 minutes early, then I'm late.
Yeah.
Like, I'm ridiculously organised.
But I do realise, because even you mentioned, you're going to aim to be here like 10 minutes before you arrange. So actually, the intentions were there. I'll give you that.
Thank you. And so I really did. I was convinced that I did have ADHD, despite there being some clear things that I didn't align with. And then I was looking into it more, and obviously one of the big things that people with ADHD struggle with is dopamine. And I started talking to my therapist about dopamine, and she was telling me a little bit more. And she was saying, now that you mention it, like dopamine deficiency does exhibit a lot of these symptoms and a lot of these things as well. That can be caused by trauma, long-term exposure to trauma. And so obviously trauma, how it affects your brain over the years, it literally like changes the shape of your brain. And I've been listening to Stephen Bartlett, The Diary of a CEO. You're a big fan as well.
I'm a big fan of
Did
his,
you listen to the Dr. Daniel, I think it's Arman, his latest one? Yeah. Like what he was telling about the brain and how different receptors can be like crushed with trauma. And so we worked out essentially that what I am struggling with, the reason for a lot of my behaviors was because my body was struggling to produce the amount of dopamine it needs. And with that, obviously, there goes your motivation, there goes your like pleasure, like everything. And what you need for your highs are things like alcohol, drugs.
I guess almost like you say, it has to be
shopping,
external because
eating,
the internal system isn't
exactly,
firing, so,
which explains so much, because alcohol really, really affects me quite badly. Not from a hangover perspective, but mentally. So I've completely quit drinking. And like,
same here.
You're nice.
Yeah.
It's tough to talk about it without sounding like you're on a soapbox, because it's obviously so ingrained in society. But for me, like if I had a drink, and it would take me a week mentally to recover, to just stop hating myself.
I think it's interesting. That's something I want to kind of stop, because it's something that myself. So I'm coming up to, I think it's 2.5 years now.
That's
since I
awesome.
drink. For me, it was almost it wasn't necessarily the anxiety that people call it. There's a little bit of that, but for me, I'm now fairly aware of what's an intrusive thought. When my brain is, just kind of, thoughts are firing, and I can kind of rationalise them a lot. But as soon as if I was drunk, then that just went. So it was more like I would get super emotional, get really upset, everything was exaggerated. I think with like the thoughts, so that I wasn't then able to realise what is real, what is not, and would just end up getting upset. And so I just realised that, why am I doing this to myself? And there was a moment where it was like, okay, I need to stop. And that was when I woke up in the JR after drinking. But it wasn't the fact that I'd been super like drunk or they needed to take me in. It was the way the nurses were speaking to me. It was obviously things I'd been saying when I was there is what would concern them about, like, myself, wanting to be here, etc., etc. So that was a bit of like a wake up call. And I shouldn't have needed that. But sometimes, it's
for me, it was one of the trips when I came back to Oxford. And the first couple of times I came back to Oxford, I was riddled with anxiety of like constantly looking over my shoulder. Who was I going to bump into?
Especially when you're such a big name.
But it was, but because obviously everyone had a lot of questions. And so I think one of my coping mechanisms as well was when I was catching up with people was to show how happy I was and just to go out for drinks. And there was one night in particular where it was ridiculous what I was drinking, and with complete strangers. And I think I had a friend who cancelled on me last minute, and it was a point in Oxford when no one was around, and I realised I'm in Oxford and I was made in Oxford and I don't have one person that I can call right now. And it was that point that I just got absolutely hammered and started talking to people I didn't know, went to a club at my age, it was. But this is the thing, it all came back to dopamine, because I have a much lower baseline than normal. I need a lot more to get me up to a normal functioning level.
Yeah.
So booze is a really good cheat for that. But not just one drink, because as soon as you start to come down, you're like, no, I need to stay up, I need to stay up. And that happens a lot with alcohol, with drugs, like binge shopping, binge drinking.
Almost that kind of erratic behaviour.
Binge eating as well.
Yeah.
So it explains a lot. Like, I never thought that I had a problem with alcohol, but it was to the point that if I did have one drink, I just wouldn't stop. And when I was particularly unhappy in Oxford, binge shopping was a big thing. I'm still riddled with credit card debt that I'm battling from that time when my mental health was at its lowest.
Yeah.
Binge eating as well. Like, I developed a bulimia eating disorder. And so all of these things, all of these behaviours that were really toxic to me, I only worked out last year that it was purely chemical. Which there's a reassurance in that, in like, okay, it's not just my fault. Like, it's not.
No, definitely not.
There's nothing wrong with me per se. Obviously, it's not optimal. But so then when I started to take my wellness seriously, I literally made a list of, and did loads of research, what is the best dopamine boosting activities that I could do.
Yeah.
And I literally took that list. I read Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Amazing book. And this idea of habit stacking, of, really finding a list of habits that you want to implement, and then how you seamlessly put them into your day. My list of habits were every single natural dopamine boosting activity going. Gratitude is a huge one, and it doesn't have to be big. Like, I have this little £2 notebook that I got that was reduced in Tesco, and it looked like it needed a home. And I was like, you're coming home with me. My friend Connor, who I still credit pretty much to most of my mental health, he told me this thing of, just write something that made you laugh today, something that made you smile today, and something that you're thankful for. And it can literally be bullet points, but it's just thinking about those things is an incredible boost to your dopamine, and it then attracts you to do that more, because then if you're doing that more, you go out in your day, and then
almost
you
looking for things to make you smile.
You automatically are looking for more things. Like, when I was standing at the bus stop for 20 minutes because I'd taken the wrong bus and I was waiting for you to come pick me up. The sun, it was so sunny, and I had a direct, like, natural sunlight spot, and I was just like, oh, well, this is really nice. Natural sunlight is dopamine boosting.
You said, and I realised that it's just that kind of, that positive spin on things. First thing you say when you get in the car, oh, at least it's nice weather and stuff.
Yeah, at least it doesn't rain.
Some people would be like, really, really fuming. They might not even want to come on, and it might change the whole dynamic for the podcast. I don't know, maybe inside you're like, oh, just want to be back in Derry. But in terms of that...
Well, there's definitely no sunshine in Derry, so that's not what I was thinking. But so it is things like that. Journaling is a huge dopamine booster. Listening to music, exercise obviously is huge. Eating the right foods, like protein. I was not eating nearly enough protein, and protein is like what you need for dopamine. If you don't have any protein in you, you're not gonna get happy. So, like having like a protein shake each morning,
It's funny, isn't it? Because people often associate that with muscle building and gaining.
No, like if I don't have a protein, this sounds so like ew, but like if I don't have my protein shake in the morning, I'm not going to be in a good mood. The other thing is, like, which is really interesting, coffee. Like, caffeine is a huge boost in dopamine. Now, like, it's been funny because obviously I don't drink, and this week has been very social and catching up with people, and I've been on a few 0%. But also, if I'm meeting someone in the evening, the first thing I'll do before I go out in the evening is have a coffee.
Yeah.
And so I would say my average this week has been about 5 cups of coffee.
Okay.
Like, but not even cups like cafetiere. Like, we're talking barista
So
level 5 cups of coffee. And people were looking at me like I'm crazy. Yeah. And it is bad. Like, you know, Dr. Daniel Amen was saying, you know, caffeine restricts your blood flow to your brain, which is not good. But I would be able to have those 5-6 cups of coffee. I could have a coffee at 11 o'clock at night and I would still sleep 8 hours a night that day, with no issue. So I have an extremely high caffeine tolerance because I have such low dopamine. So it all really made a lot of sense. Yeah. Now, I'm not just feeling crap because everything's awful. I'm feeling crap because I haven't written in my journal for a couple of days. Like, I haven't been eating properly. I haven't gone to the gym. And so it makes it a lot easier to regulate myself.
And realise and you've got that list now. So it's, if I'm feeling a bit rubbish, a bit shitty, rather than turn to alcohol, caffeine, etc., I can do one of these activities. And I think that's important. And it kind of ties in nicely to what I kind of want to come round to and maybe like finish up on. I'm just kind of conscious of time. So what self-care looks like to you? And I guess that list of activities would...
Yeah, I think it's... So self-care to me is hard work. It's you know, because you have to wake up each day and you have to choose to look after yourself. Yeah. Now, there are days when, you know, when you wake up in the morning and you haven't managed to do all of those amazing dopamine boosting activities, you've got nothing in the tank. Like, I wake up most days and I've just got like absolutely nothing in the tank. And
I'm similar. Mornings is the hardest time for me. Hardest time for me.
Self-care, and I remember saying this to my friend who was a therapist, and I said, you know, there are times when I literally can't bring myself to get up in the morning, which sounds a lot more dramatic than I mean it to, but it's just that I am absolutely flat.
Relate, and there's no reason sometimes. It's just that motivation, and you say dopamine motivation.
It's the motivation because
get up and go.
Because I'm on low battery. Like, I'm waking up at like 10% battery. Right, and I've just like, there's times where I really struggle to get out of bed. And my friend said to me, she was like, Cassie, you just need to get your feet on the ground. You just need to sit up and just get your feet on the side of the bed. If you can manage that, then everything else is doable. And there are times when, you know, it's hard to do that. Or there's times that I can do that, but it's hard to bring myself to have a shower. And it's so self-care is, to me, waking up each day and deciding to look after yourself when you really don't want to.
It's that difference between discipline and motivation, isn't it? Like, people say about motivation is great, but you'll only do it when you feel like it. But discipline is still doing it even if you don't feel like it, because you're always, with self-care particularly, you're always going to feel better for doing it. I've recently got my first gym membership. I haven't been yet, but it was only Saturday that I got it, so I'm not going to be too hard on myself.
That's fine.
Not going to be too hard on myself, but it is that, and there's an element of I want to go. It's literally right by the office. But I don't know why. There's a hesitancy, and I know where it comes from. It comes from, I put it in a little post. It's from my memory of gyms as being really self-conscious. I was at an all-boys school and wasn't in best of shape, wasn't one of the like confident kids, and just hated it because I was like, everyone's looking at me. And I know, and I mean, I know as soon as I go in, I'll love it and I'll feel better for it, and then that'll be it. But it's just that first, I guess, getting your feet on the ground, getting my foot in the gym, and just doing it for me. So tomorrow I'm gonna do it. But because
there comes like almost a bitterness with everything, like which not with everything. That doesn't sound right. But you know, it's. If you see those videos on Instagram or TikTok, like, I decided to, you know, listen to what people say and take a walk for my mental health, and I actually feel better. Like, it's always annoying. Like, I wish it didn't.
Yeah, because it's almost like, I could have been doing this.
I know,
all this time, but...
I know, and there is, you know, obviously, trauma makes you stronger. You do come out of it, the other side. And if things didn't happen the way they happened, I wouldn't be home. I wouldn't know who I am. I wouldn't know what I need. I wouldn't have met the most wonderful man in the world. Like, I wouldn't have had any of those things.
Exactly.
But there are still days where you almost get a little bit bitter about those things. You know, I still sometimes get quite triggered when someone calls me resilient. They're like, oh, and they mean it in the nicest possible way. And they mean it as a compliment, like, oh, you're so resilient, like, you're so brave, you're so courageous. Like, yeah, but I wish I didn't have to be.
Yeah, like, normally resilience is never a choice, is it?
Yeah, and obviously that's still probably an unhealthy way to look at it. But that's just on the down days. Obviously, in talking about gratitude, I'm so grateful for where my life is now. It still has the hard days when, you know, I need to get my feet on the other side of the bed. But it is very much more manageable now. And that all has come really from getting to the root of the problem and then knowing what habits I need to do to solve them, and then choosing myself.
Amazing. And just to finish off, we kind of covered it there, but a question I ask everyone really at the end of it is, what does happiness mean to you?
Oh, happiness. Happiness and the happy days, they're there to just be absolutely savoured and to make the bad days feel less bad. Because the only way, like, you know, this whole thing, you need bad days to realise how happy days are. Yeah. And so it is incredible if we can find happiness in the small things in our day-to-day, and that comes with gratitude practice. But I mean, I said this in the last podcast, the one or the two things that I'm looking for now in my life across the board is just peace of mind and joy, and just trying to find that in the little moments as much as you can.
Amazing. Thanks, Cassie.
Thanks
for your time. We'll leave it there.
We'll leave it there.
We'll finish with that. Amazing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you so much for tuning in to this latest episode of Flat Whites and Insights, and I really hope you gained something from that conversation. I know I certainly did. It would mean a lot if you can like and subscribe on whatever platform you may be watching or listening on, but also if you head over to Instagram and give me a follow at Cappuccino. This is the best place to contact me, but also see the latest developments on the platform as we look to increase awareness of mental health through my passions for coffee and football. In addition, if you've heard something that you can relate to or you want to talk about a little bit more, feel free to message me on that platform. But also, if you fancy coming on yourself and having a conversation, then do let me know, because I'm always keen to connect with new people and get insights into other areas and other passions and other challenges that I might have no experience of myself. Thanks again, and I really hope you tune in for the next episode. Take care of yourselves. I've been Hans. Thank you.